Wiki, altrightnovelist.com. Ever since the Alek MInassian massacre took place in Toronto, I've been interested in seeing the incel response or reaction, the response of the incel community. I put the word in quotes just because I hate talking about community, this community or that community or so forth. Just from incel people, from men who embrace the label of incel. I've been interested in trying to find like an incel podcast where they talk about, well, here's this thing that happened in Toronto. How does this relate to us? How should we respond to this? How does this impact us and our movement and people of our, what do you call it? Do you call it an orientation? A condition, I think maybe would be a better word for it. So that's what I've been looking for, but I've been looking in vain. And unfortunately, and I don't say this with any malice, incels aren't that interesting. Again, I don't say this maliciously. I don't say this as someone who has a beef with incels or who wants to pick on them or wants to make fun of them, because I'm not, and I don't. I think I sympathize with incels as a despised male group that is unwanted by women and generally derided by the culture at large, derided if not worse, derided if not condemned, and just thoroughly hated on by the culture at large. I'm naturally inclined to be sympathetic to the incels, and it might just be that I haven't cast a wide enough net and haven't found the interesting incel who's got something of note to say about what took place in Toronto, the massacre undertaken, the van massacre, the vehicular massacre undertaken in Toronto, which killed 10 people and injured many more, by a man who, at least according to one source, according to one post on Facebook from 4chan or something like that, affiliated with 4chan, this post that claimed to be from him, saying this is part of the incel revolution. And I still wonder about that, like many others. I don't know whether that's actual or a hoax. And if it is a hoax, then this entire issue is moot. Because if it's a hoax, then what we have is just the case of a 25-year-old man who is reported to be rather eccentric and kept to himself, and who committed this act out of the blue for no apparent reason. And maybe it's just maybe mental illness is the culprit. No other reason. Who knows? But let's just posit that the post is actual, and I guess there are some reasons to think that it is actual, that it is true, that it's authentic, that the post that was from someone who claimed to be Alek MInassian really did come from Alek MInassian, and thus he framed his act of violence as a commission of a revolutionary act against the Chads and the Stacys, as he says, as he calls it, in that post. Well, here's the thing, and here's maybe why I find that it's hard to that it's difficult to come across an interesting incel. I think that embracing the label incel and making that a centerpiece of your identity, you already become, and again, I really am not saying this to put anybody down or make fun of anybody, or be maliciously negative about anybody, but it seems to me that you embrace bitterness as the whole of your identity. If, again, you say that you're an incel and this is really how you identify and this is really how you relate to the world. I am incel. Okay? It'd be one thing if you were just, somebody who is celibate, would rather not be celibate, but finds that he's not attractive to the opposite sex and has a difficult time approaching them. But that's just a part of who he is, and he talks about other things as well, and that's not the condition that he relates to in relation to the world around him. I think when it becomes the thing that you embrace with relation to the world around you, then there's almost nothing more to say than I'm angry, I'm bitter, I feel rejected, I would like to have this thing, called a sex life or whatever, a marriage, a girlfriend, what have you, but I can't have it because I'm just not attractive, I'm not appealing, and so therefore I am involuntarily celibate. I mean, where do you go from there? It's like everything you say has to be some variation on the theme of I'm angry, I'm lonely, I'm bitter, I'm rejected. Today, I'm just struggling with my condition, being who I am. It sucks. I mean, and all of that may be true. And again, I'm not like some people who are, wanting to slap anybody around or tell anybody to, go to the gym or move out of their parents' basement or anything like that. I'm really, really not saying that. Not saying anything of the kind. But it does seem to me that, unfortunately, you put yourself in a certain kind of position when you identify in this particular way. And I know people are going to hate on me for making this comparison, but it is something like what some radical feminists, the kind of mentality that some of them embrace, whereby I'm angry at men, men have abused me, men have hurt me, men are bad, men rule society, men are evil, and I'm angry at them. And everything I say is just some variation of why I'm angry at patriarchy and men and male-dominated society, which doesn't actually exist, but from my frame of reference. But let's say that you're one of them and that's what you believe. Again, you put yourself in this bind as far as having anything interesting to say about anything or anybody. Because whinging about your condition, I hate to call it whinging or whining because that seems to belittle the grief or the pain, and I'm not trying to do that. I know I'm making a lot of statements here where I'm trying to qualify my criticism, and maybe that's annoying some of you already. I know that, I mean, no matter what I do, if I'm qualified, then people will say, come on, just say it. And if I'm not qualified, then people will say, well, you need to look at this, this, and this, you bastard. Why don't you qualify your statements with some nuance? So in some ways you can't win, but I just want to, be true to my actual feelings on the subject. So that's why I'm making these qualifications. And it was hard for me to grab at the word qualification there for some reason. Words sometimes can be elusive when you want them the most, as I've found ever since I started doing a YouTube podcast or having a YouTube channel. I guess this isn't really a podcast. I don't know. whatever. So, with respect to Alek MInassian and what he did, and what it represents, and whether or not it's authentically an incel kind of gesture, and whether or not it should be embraced. I mean, I don't think massacring random people should ever be embraced. Don't get me wrong, but I could see if you make, you know, incel the label that you with which you see yourself, then you might not have the same morality that I do. I don't know. And you know, from your perspective, if we really are being cruelly crushed by the Chads and the Stacys of the world, then maybe behavior like this can be seen as justified. I don't know. The problem is, again, that I don't see a lot of interesting incel commentary on this subject, and I'm a little disappointed by that. Now, if anybody is watching this, thinks you can direct me somewhere to somebody who does have something interesting to say about it, besides, you know, the woe is me, my life sucks because I want women and women don't want me thing, then please point me there, and I'd be very interested to hear from them. But it's been a striking thing as far as this goes. Now, the other thing I want to say, which is maybe the other side of the coin with respect to the incel thing, is, and maybe this just should go without saying, there's so many things, so many ridiculous inconsistencies that just go without saying, that are part of the media template, that are part of the establishment parsed manner of thinking, the enforced manner of thinking that we are all supposed to have if we are good, decent people and don't stray too far from what is considered to be decent and approved human discourse on this subject. If this were any other kind of situation, if this were any other, let's say, minority group, and one member of this group, one person who may be a member of this group or may not, in this case, because again, MInassian's actual relationship to the incel group in a wider sense is questionable. But if there was, say, I mean, just a more typical case, a Muslim. If a radical Islamist runs down a whole bunch of people, which has happened, of course, unless those are just psyops, which is also possible. I don't know so much what to think anymore, but I'm just going to stipulate that sometimes some of these things, you know, some of these attacks by radical Muslims are real and not just psyops. When this happens, you will, of course, see the upholders of the establishment say immediately, "Oh, we must not judge all Muslims by this, by the act of this one person, and this should not affect our attitude towards mass immigration. But of course, we need more mass immigration from the third world, from non-whites and non-Christians, and from alien people who are just alien to our culture. We need more and more and more of that. And we shouldn't let the act of this one unfortunately oriented person who's so confused about the truth of his faith, because true Islam is not about violence. No, 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 no." That's their immediate response. But in this case, somebody from the incel community, let's just stipulate that he is indeed from the incel community, commits an act like this, and I mean, there are a ton more radical Islamists in the world and there are people who, poor, lonely guys who identify as incels. But isn't it striking how the immediate response of the Lugenpress, as I called them the last time in my last video, in which I discussed Alek MInassian and his case, isn't it interesting how they all rush to this, oh, incels are bad people. Look at the things that they're saying on their message boards. And they cite a couple things where people say things like, I'm glad he killed a woman. I'm glad that the first person he killed was a pretty woman, because the Stacys are evil for rejecting us, and blah, blah, blah. And that's treated with absolutely no nuance at all. But it's in the opposite direction, right? Whereas with the radical Islamist, he commits his act of violence, and then the media discussing him. I mean, the media is just useless. They're useless. They are sleepwalking, intellectually speaking. They are taking their orders from somewhere, whether consciously or not, and just repeating what they are told, and putting out there what they're obliged and obligated to put out there, depending on the situation. That's why they are useless. And yet they're still treated with respect. It boggles the mind. I mean, you have to turn to tabloids to find the truth of things, to find something resembling the truth of things. The Daily Mail, you'll find more truth in that publication, and it is tacky. It is off color. It's yellow journalism, you might say, but you find a lot of truth there, whereas in the respectable press, all you find is Soviet-esque propaganda repeating the party line again and again and again and again and again. Okay? So, anyway, returning to what I've been talking about with respect to this case. If Alek MInassian is a radical Islam, people on, message boards for ISIS, related to ISIS or sympathetic to ISIS, if they come on and say, "Glory be to Allah, he has killed many infidels and now he is enjoying the glorious virgins in paradise," and there's no way that mainstream publications pay any attention to that. There's no way that they report these quotes in their supposedly ever so dignified, ever so elevated publications. There's no way they do that, even though it's what's happening. But with the Alek MInassian case, because he's an incel, because he's a representative of this group that must be vilified, this group that's anti-feminist, in a much more radical sense, of course, in some ways, because some of them are plainly hostile to women. And I'm not denying that there isn't. I'm not denying that there is a part of the incel group or community that is plainly hostile to women and murderous in its rhetoric, and I don't approve of that, obviously. But the difference in how the lying media responded to Alek MInassian, since he is perceived to be a member of this group, versus if he had been a radical Islamist, is just extraordinary. It is amazing, and why anybody gives any credence to these cretinous organs of supposed news, really just thoroughgoing, absolute propaganda. Whatever happens, we tell you how to think about it, and the way we tell you to think about it is always the same way. It's maddening. But of course, there are more and more people, I think, who are hip to it. So I guess those are the couple things that I wanted to say about this entire case. You know, having had a little bit more time to reflect on it, I wanted to come back to it. It is an intriguing case, and in some ways it is in my wheelhouse, thematically speaking, as far as, you know, the stuff that I've written about ruminations of a low-status male. The incels are certainly the low-status, you know, in the low-status male group. It seems to me, though, again, to return to the first part of this video, that a lot of what identifies them is just fetching and bitching and whining and moaning. And without denying their pain, I wish that there was more to them than that. But maybe if there was more to them than that, they would cease to be incel. Because the whole idea of being incel is that you want something and you can't get it, but you still want it. And so when you embrace the label of incel, involuntary celibate, I'm celibate, but I don't want to be celibate, but I'm celibate. When you embrace that label, what you're really embracing is your frustration. And there's only so there are only so many variations of your frustration that you can relate before you just get boring and tedious. So maybe if the incels decided to have something interesting to say, maybe they would just cease to be incels. I don't know. Maybe that's, I don't mean to be scathing, but I think there's something to that. Anyhow, those are a few additional thoughts, and I'll probably come back to this story at some point in the future, but I just wanted to comment a little bit more on this story with the space of a few more days between the actual event and the media fallout from the event. Thank you for watching. My name is Andy Nowicki. Please check out my work at altrightnovelist.com.